Da-da-da-da-da. Here we go. Hello, and welcome to the Rock and Roll Podcast. I am your host, John Harris. Today on the Rock and Roll Podcast, we have Acherontia Styx, and they've got a new album called Shadow and Flame, which was released on September 6th via Dwarf Records. Right now, I'm being joined by Grant to share some more information about this release, a couple of tracks, potentially sinister, sexually sinister music video, and then what the band has been up to this year, what kind of plans they have. Stellar chat I'm looking forward to. Grant, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks for having me on, John. It's an absolute pleasure.
Beautiful. Well, speaking of pleasure, one of the tracks we've got to chat about here that also gets the music video with the classic intro with the band name and everything else, the record company, the whole bit off to the lower left with the typing there.
Old school all the way, man. Old school all the way.
Old school all the way, which definitely shows at least how old I am.
And me.
I was actually just thinking the other day, speaking of which, how much the record industry has changed, the music industry has changed. And one of those things is, remember when a band could actually say, hey, we got a music video up on MTV?
Yeah, man. When MTV actually played music videos.
Yeah. And now it's just, we want to make a music video, then go do it. And if you want it to be somewhere, then put it up on YouTube. And if you want people to see it, then pay YouTube money. It's just so incredibly DIY now.
And that video is DIY as well. There's nothing professional about it whatsoever. I made that music video myself. But I do a lot of the music video stuff, not just for Acherontia Styx, but for everybody on the label, because it's something that I enjoy to do. And it's good to have something a little bit visual there, you know what I mean? Especially at the moment, you mentioned what we've been doing for the past year. We've been doing for the past year what everybody else has been doing for the past year. We've been sitting on our asses watching Netflix and playing on Xbox and cursing the fact that we can't go and do anything else. But like I said, we like to keep it old school. There isn't the medium out there anymore for music videos on TV and that kind of stuff. But it's not costing us anything. All it costs is my time, and I enjoy putting them together. So, especially given the subject matter for Pleasures of the Flesh, we thought, let's put something a little bit, what's the right word? I wouldn't quite say, it's not quite not suitable for work. There's no nudity or anything like that in it, but it's definitely the kind of thing that might give you a boner if you watch it 2 or 3 times in a row.
There you go. Perfect. Now, you mentioned a few things there that I wanted to touch base on, and just for some carefree chitter chat. You said you guys were watching Netflix and Xbox. What does Acherontia Styx do on Netflix and Xbox? We all quite like our RPG games. We like sort of Borderlands, we like Fallout games. Anything where you can run around and do whatever you want, be the bad guy. As far as Netflix is concerned, I think all of us have probably completed Netflix over the course of the last sort of 6 or 7 months, because all of us were on furlough. I've rewatched so many TV series over the course of lockdown. I've rewatched Dexter. I've rewatched Hannibal. I've just started watching Brave New World again. There's a lot of fantasy involved in what we do. Daredevil Records itself. Daredevil is it's a Tolkien reference. It's the Mines of Moria from Lord of the Rings, and they're also known as the Daredevil Mines. Anything that's sci-fi, anything that's fantasy, anything that's got a good bit of violence and nudity in it, we're going to enjoy it. And does that then lend itself to the album that we're chatting about today, Shadow and Flame? Do you guys take inspiration from those sorts of sources, the Xbox and the Netflix? Anything fantasy, sci-fi?
Yes and no. The writing, when we write stuff, it's a very, very open process. Paul and Adam do the bassist and guitarist, respectively. They tend to write most of the music. Probably about 99% of what you hear musically is done between Paul and Adam. And then when it comes to the lyrics and the vocals, we look at the finished music, look at the drum patterns and the riff patterns and that kind of stuff, and then kind of not really a decision is made, but a conversation is had between me, Paul, and Jake as to whose writing structure is going to be best suited to the song, and also whose vocal style is going to be best suited to the song. We would consider me the lead vocalist, but I only sing lead on
3/4 of the tracks on the album. 2 of the tracks are sung by Paul, and one of the leads is done by Jake as well. The one that Jake wrote, Evolution, that's got a very sci-fi kind of feel to it. It's very, I suppose the closest you could get to it would be if you're listening to stuff like Obsolete and Demanufacture, and, you know, that kind of Fear Factory sort of era. There's a like a post-apocalyptic, humanity is enslaved kind of vibe going on with that track. With some of the other ones, I'm just trying to think of subject matters. Cursed Love was directly inspired by a novel that I used to love when I was younger called Vert. It's a post-apocalyptic sci-fi novel based in Manchester in the UK, where cultures evolved to the point where the drugs are like collective experiences. Anybody that watches the video or anything like that, you'll see there's all these feathers floating around in the video. The drugs are feathers, and if everybody takes the same feather, then you experience the trip collectively. It's a messed up book. It really, really is. It's full of sex and violence and incest and all of the other things that make life really, really entertaining. But, you know, again, then we'd go on to, like you mentioned, Pleasures of the Flesh at the beginning of the interview there. That's kind of, it's about BDSM, it's about horror. I wrote that one. I was watching Hellraiser, and I was looking at the female Cenobite and thinking, what kind of mad, kinky stuff must this girl have been into in order to want to open that box? So it kind of, that song expanded out from there to not just the horror elements, but also the, you know, the very, very sexual elements that are involved in it. And I think what I'm generally getting at is there's no one source that we go to with regards to what we write. We write about what we're thinking about at the time, what we're feeling at the time. So if that is, you know, something that's very, very closely based to the narrative of some pre-existing material, like Cursed Love, so be it. If it's something that's completely original, like Paul especially is very, very good at just taking a feeling and expanding out on a very, what you would consider a very small feeling like anger or depression or anxiety or something like that, and vocalizing the entire feeling into these huge kind of storytelling elements, then, you know, so be it. Like I say, we write about whatever the hell we feel like at the time, to be honest.
Well, and I guess that takes me to my next question. You mentioned a few different topics on different tracks. So is there not a theme running through the album? And I guess what I mean by that question, Grant, is when you guys composed Shadow and Flame, what was the intention, if there was one?
Well, what we were looking at coming out of the first EP, which came out last year, it was called Your Possible Pasts. We noticed a very, very kind of set line, if you will, between the way that we were writing, and that's where the Shadow and the Flame thing, that's also a Tolkien reference. It's reference to the Balrog. Anybody that's watched Lord of the Rings will remember the quote with Gandalf where he goes, the beast of shadow and flame. We looked at it, and kind of obviously the flame to us was representing a lot of the raw kind of death metal anger sort of elements that we get coming through in a lot of our music, because the album is kind of, it's not split down the middle, so to speak, but there's 4 or 5 tracks on the album that are very ferocious blast beats, kind of snarling, growling, vicious vocals, and then the other half of the album is a bit more emotional. Scorned, one of the other tracks that, you know, I was going to talk about a little bit more, that's a very emotional track. Cursed Love is a very, very emotional track. So it is kind of conceptual in the fact that the shadow element of the title represents the emotion that we pour into it, and the kind of the not sadder emotions isn't really the right way of putting it, but the more kind of heartfelt emotions that go into one side of the music, and then the flame element is all of the anger and the viciousness and, you know, what you would expect out of a death metal band, songs about cutting people up and what have you. As far as concepts is concerned as well, we've brought one track forward from last year's EP, and it kind of ties in with the band name and where the initial kind of creative elements of the band came from. Acherontia Styx is the moth that Buffalo Bill forces down his victim's throat in Silence of the Lambs, and 2 of the tracks off that first EP were direct Thomas Harris references. We've got a track on there called Lecter, which, I mean, that speaks for itself. And then the one that we've carried forward from the EP and we've re-recorded it and restructured it a little bit is called Eyes of Glass. And that's reference to the name's gone, the Tooth Fairy, Francis Dolarhyde, from the novel Red Dragon. Anybody that's read it or seen the movie, he's sticking bits of mirror into people's eyes after he's killed them and does all of the nasty stuff that he does to people in that in those scenes. So that Eyes of Glass reference is a reference there. We've moved away from, I mean, we were never going to be a Thomas Harris tribute band. You know what I mean? It wasn't a case of, right, all we're going to write about is the stuff that's written about in the Hannibal Lecter series of novels. But it was definitely a big inspiration very early on in the songwriting process with a lot of the twisted imagery that Harris put across. We'd already brought the band name in from that. So we kind of thought, yeah, you know, Hannibal Lecter, we can get some material out of that. Of course we can. The other killers involved Francis Dolarhyde for Eyes of Glass. And then there is a little bit of Buffalo Bill reference going on in one of the other tracks off the album. But especially when we completed the lineup, bringing Adam and Jake in at the end of last year, you know, immediately it was a case of the floodgates are open. Let's just write what we want to write and let it flow. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that actually makes a lot of sense. Now, I guess going back to the music video for Pleasures of Her Flesh.
Yeah.
You mentioned it was DIY. Take us through that process. What were you looking to do? And are you excited about the end product?
It's probably my favorite video that I've put together as far as a finished product is concerned. I think it flows very well. I think it's synced up very well. Because Pleasures of Her Flesh is about sex, it's about rough sex, you know, sex that's bordering on violence and murder and what have you. So we wanted it to be provocative, but not in the, you know, the hip-hop video and pop video kind of thing where it's just blatant flesh and sexualization. We wanted it to be teasing. We wanted it to be, you know, flashing imagery and kind of, did I see what I just saw, as opposed to just some poor girl or some poor guy even just standing there half naked shaking themselves around. You know, we don't want to be drawing attention to our music based purely on controversial imagery or anything like that, which is why anybody that watches the video, you'll see, you know, the longest cut in it I think is about 6 or 7 seconds before it snaps away to something else. We wanted something that would stimulate people visually, that would represent what the song is about, but without going into the realms of either over-sexualizing things or indeed the other end of the spectrum, because we're talking about elements of BDSM and we're talking about elements of horror movies like Hellraiser didn't for 1 second want to start sort of promoting sexual violence or glorifying sexual violence, even if it is consensual, especially in this day and age. You know what I mean? Everybody is offended by something, and it's not like we've got a problem with offending people, but offending people just for the sake of it, that's a different kettle of fish altogether.
It sure is.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting mindset, because I remember younger years, 20, 25 years ago, I was definitely in that position of like, oh, you want to get offended? No. I will give you something to be offended about.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, we've got videos that'll gross people out. You know, the Lecter video, especially, it's another one that I put together myself. It was the first music video that I put together once we got Acherontia Styx back together. And I just went through an old film archive and found loads of footage from like the 20s and the 30s of exploratory footage and exploratory surgery footage, and, you know, all these kind of brutal surgical instruments and that kind of stuff. You know, there was a podcast that have been very, very big supporters of us. Can I say the name?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Yeah, a bunch of guys from Ohio called Licking County Metalheads. They were the first people to air our video like outside of the UK, and they turned around after seeing the video for the first time and went, for the love of God, do not eat spaghetti while you are watching that video. You know, they were comparing us to Cannibal Corpse and Morbid Angel and all that kind of stuff, which obviously is a death metal band. The minute somebody utters your band in the same sentence as somebody like that, even if they're turning around and saying that we're a shit version of them, which they weren't. But, you know, even if it was a bad comparison, you'd still be like, oh my God, you know, they said it in the same sense. But, you know, we got all of the grossness out of the way with that video. And we don't want to be a stereotype when it comes to metal. We don't want to be a stereotype when it comes to death metal. And here's a load of blood and guts, or here's an album cover with a girl getting her bits ripped open and all that kind of stuff. It's been done. It's been done to death. So it doesn't need doing anymore. We'll explore new avenues when it comes to the imagery and the album covers and single covers and videos and T-shirts and whatever else it might be. It's difficult to be original in this day and age, but we're trying to stay as original as we can.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is you brought up, a couple of bands there that I had in mind when I first heard you guys, because death metal's become such a unique thing nowadays. Where when it first started coming out, you had Deicide, Morbid Angel, Cannibal Corpse, and it had a very rough sound, or Death even, the band Death. And it had a very rough sound for an obvious reason. I mean, who wanted to produce that stuff? But after it caught on, fast forward, especially coming from England, you've got a significantly more polished version of it with something like Cadaver.
Yeah.
Or there's a few other bands that I can think of that came from England that are like, with Surgical Steel, that band.
Carcass.
Yeah, Carcass.
Love Carcass, man. Massive Carcass fan.
Yeah. Where all of a sudden you've got a death metal band where people are turning their heads and going, how did they get that guitar tone? Like that didn't happen with Cannibal Corpse. I don't think, anyway. Where anybody's going, man, how did they get that guitar? The bass player, maybe. He had a pretty sick tone.
Indeed he did.
But that kind of brings my next question of, so the vibe I get, at least from this particular album on a production level, is that Cannibal Corpse sound. Are you guys looking to polish it up a little bit more, make it, I guess, maybe more modern sounding, or were you guys looking to take it into the future?
Well, we wanted to try and obviously wear our hearts on our sleeves a little bit, and we've each got we've got common ground in death metal, the four of us, but the sort of major influences of each member come from slightly different directions. Paul, our bass player, is very, very big into his black metal. Let's not talk about black metal production sounds. Normally sounds like it's been recorded in a tin bucket for the best part of it. But then again, modern black metal is starting to go to a more polished sound as well. Adam, our guitarist who does the majority of our production, he comes, I wouldn't say power metal is the right way of putting it, but these kind of the heavier sort of post death metal that came out, sort of around the early 2000s, bands like Arch Enemy and a lot of stuff that came out of Scandinavia, where you've got the rawness of death metal, but you do have a very sort of polished, clean and melodic element coming through it. And I think that's what Adam is trying to bring into the production a lot, is he wants to make it raw enough to be death metal, but clean enough that people aren't just going to be, people will give it a chance if they're not into death metal, and they'll actually get to explore a little bit more about what we're doing and see that it's not just and there's more to it than that.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Now, one of my, I guess, last questions is, we chatted a bit about coronavirus. We chatted a bit about, completed Netflix. And that's one of the things I love hearing from people is, I've completed Netflix. Like, oh, okay. It'd be nice, addicting, actually, if anybody from Netflix is listening in, to actually have a completion score where it's like, ding, you earned a gold star. You've watched 6 hours of Netflix or whatever. And then people start doing that. But anyway, what else has been going on for you guys this year? Have you turned coronavirus into a blessing?
And Adam has a solo project, because that guy's guitar playing it's on a whole other level. It really, really is. Aside from the fact that he's like 6'9", so when he picks up a normal guitar, it looks like a ukulele in his hand. Anybody that can remember back to when Jim Martin was in Faith No More, and you'd see this absolute monster, to the point where Jim Martin had to have special guitars made that were bigger than a normal guitar because he was so huge that he couldn't play a standard guitar. Adam has released a solo album that definitely harnessed a lot of his kind of ill feeling and kind of just general sort of negative emotion that came out with coronavirus, because the vast majority of the album had been completed from a writing perspective before the
before the plague took over the world. It didn't really affect this album too much. The only song that we've actually written during the pandemic, which we added to the album at the last minute, was Cursed Love. But we had all of the demos down, we had all of the song structures down and that kind of thing. So it was just a case of waiting for lockdowns to lift so that we could go and get the final recordings done on this. But as far as the rest of the band is concerned, because we all like to do this as well as doing our own thing, Paul released a solo album, Adam released a solo album, and then obviously once there was the chance for us to be able to get back together a little bit and get the rest of this recorded, we all went storming into the studio and went, right, let's get the finals of this down and get it out, because we had to keep putting the release date back and back and back. Initially, we'd looked at releasing it in May, and then obviously we couldn't get the final recordings done, so then we put it back to June, hopefully thinking that it was going to get lifted. That didn't happen again. So, everybody's kept themselves busy creatively. We've been writing towards the next album. But as I said, most of what is on Shadow and Flame was already finalized in sort of December, January of last year and this year. It's just the frustration involved in actually being able to get the final recordings done that wound us the hell up. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Have you guys started working? I know there's some solo projects that are happening, but have you guys started working on maybe the next album or next EP or the next set of steps?
Indeed, we have. We're taking a little bit of downtime. We want the album to breathe a little bit as opposed to just, pummeling through and releasing. So up until Christmas, we're still writing. We're still bouncing riffs back and forward and ideas back and forward, and getting demos and all that kind of stuff done, but there isn't a focus from all four of us of going, right, we have to write a new album. It's not the way we work anyway. The pressure in music, especially in my experience, because I've been gigging for a long, long time. I'm 38 now, and I've been playing live music since I was 15. I've worked with some amazing musical projects over the course of my life, but I've worked in some very, very musically stressful situations as well. And the vast majority of that stress came from the pressure of, we have to release, we have to do this, we have to do that. So we never ever look at it in a case of, this has to be written by this time, especially at the moment and what's happened over the course of the last 12 months. Like I say, ideas are still flowing, writing is still happening, but none of us are looking at each other thinking there needs to be pressure on to be writing. We've got maybe 3 songs for the next album that are in the pipeline at the moment. I've finished lyrics on 1. There's another 4 sets of songs on the band drive that we're kind of toying around with and, working out structures for and that kind of stuff. But we're not pressuring ourselves to release too quickly. We'd much rather take our time and release something that we enjoy and then, put something out and end up imploding on each other. We're doing this because we're friends. We're doing this because we love music. We're not doing it for any ulterior motive, and we sure as hell aren't going to do anything that could potentially fracture the relationships in the band. We've all got fractured sanity after the last 9 months, every single one of us. So we're just taking it chilled.
And I think that's a really good title for a song, Fractured Sanity.
Hold on, I'm going to write that down. I'll have forgotten that in 10 minutes if I don't write that down. I'll tell you what, dude. If we do end up releasing that as a track, then I will make sure you get credit. I'll give you writing credit for it. You have my word, okay?
Beautiful. Thank you. As soon as you said that, immediately every ounce of, thrash metal in my soul just went, that is the most amazing title I've ever heard.
If it ends up being an album title, man, you'll be loving it.
Beautiful. All right. Well, Grant, we chatted about, we only chatted about one of the tracks on the album, but we chatted, actually, I take that back. We chatted about quite a few tracks on the album. Yeah. Pleasures of the Flesh was the main focus because of the music video. We chatted about that music video, and we chatted about coronavirus, what you guys have been up to, what you're going to be up to. We even did a little bit of, Dwaro Delph history as well, which is cool. Unless there's anything else you wanted to throw out there, my questions are done. I enjoyed having you on, and I just wanted to thank you for coming on to the Rock Metal Podcast, Grant.
It's been an absolute pleasure. You know, I love speaking to people, and obviously I love being able to kind of, you know, put our, not views, but, you know, our point of view out there. You know what I mean? I very rarely have anything interesting to say. If I'm left to my own devices, I end up saying loads and loads of really like repulsive and silly things. So I think it's probably best that I just keep my mouth shut.
All right.